continue in chapter 23. God creates the world in a way that with his word comes out something that's separate from him, from our perspective. Not from his perspective, mind you. From our perspective, we are separate. Therefore, we have our own sense of identity, of being, our own desires as a result, and so on and so forth. What are we trying to do then? In that reality is to come to a reality the way God perceives us, that we are one and bound up with him, that we're not separate from him. How do we do this? Well, by touching his inner will that expresses what he really wants, as opposed to an external will, which is, so to speak, a compelled one, right? As opposed to a compelled will, meaning a means to an end, self-compelled by God, of course, not as we are sometimes compelled by external forces. By the way, only the truly righteous are never compelled by external forces. Never. My Rebbe, never. But that's for another time. So that inner will of God is an expression of, or is expressed in, mitzvahs that he wants. And just as my arm is completely surrendered to my will, that when I will to pick up my arm, thank God I'm capable of doing that. Some things I'm not capable of doing that I want. Right? But I'm capable of that. That's how they're connected. So the will of my soul to the limb of the body. Meaning that the mitzvah is completely surrendered to the will of God and is an expression of God, but an expression of God. Therefore, when we do a mitzvah, like extending our hand to give charity, by wrapping our arm tefillin, we become united with the inner will of God. And that's what's giving us life. Now it's giving us life and vitality in two different ways. Two different ways. One is physically to the limb that's engaged in doing the act of the mitzvah. The physical limb is bound up with God in the moment of doing the mitzvah. And it's bound up to God in metaphorically, like a chariot is connected to its rider. The chariot and the rider, right? The chariot goes exactly where the rider wants to go. He moves it to the right, it goes to the right, to the left, forward, forward. Right? In other words, that the vehicle has no will of its own. Like a car, if you want a modern day, right, version of the metaphor. A car is totally dependent on its driver, on leading it, how fast it's going to go, what kind of turn it's going to make, and so on and so forth. So when we do a mitzvah, the physical limb that's engaged in doing the mitzvah, like giving charity, extending your arm, in that act, the inner will of God is giving us vitality at that moment. We're alive, we're living with that vitality. As opposed to, if you raise your hand to hit somebody, God also gives you vitality, but that's coming from klipa. That's coming from God's hiddenness. It's not coming. That's a compelled will. That what he doesn't want to give. He doesn't truly want to give. He's only giving that in order that there should be a balance between light and darkness, good and evil, so we can be free to choose, right? That we can have freedom of choice. From that freedom of choice, we're responsible. And ultimately, that we can do tshuva even, right? That's the means to the end, the ultimate end of actually doing tshuva, being totally responsible for the mistake that we make. But in any case, going back to the mitzvah, and that we're united, bound up with God in the act. So then that's the physical limb that's bound up with God, like a chariot. But then there's also the power of my soul to do an action. That's the power of the soul, right? That's not the physical limb we're talking about now. There's the limb, there's the power of my soul, which is a garment of expression of the soul, which is called action. There's thought, there's speech, and action. In the act that we do in the physical limb, but then there's the soul power of action. God is also then bound up with that part of the soul, right? Unified, one. And there the metaphor is different because it's a deeper unity. And we'll explain in a moment how the distinction between the two things are. This is getting into the minutiae, the details of understanding how we're bound up in one with God and doing the inner will of God. So the metaphor for the unity, again, for the soul power of action, as opposed to thought or speech, is like the body and soul are united. Body and soul are united, right? As in me, and in you, and every one of us, right? So much so that you can't even make a distinction. Where's the body begin? Where's the soul begin? Where's the, right? I mean, we can say where it begins, but they're seamlessly one, which is not the case of the rider and the chariot, the car and the rider and the driver of the car, right? They're not seamlessly one. Actually, they're two separate beings, totally. Yet there's a unity there in the sense that the driver is completely in control of the vehicle, the chariot, totally, right? And therefore, that's the unity, the metaphor for unity that we have with God, but in the physical of our being, the limb that's engaged in the mitzvah. Deeper unity is that which is coming to the soul and the soul power of action. That's like body and soul. That's even a deeper unity because that seamlessly is one, not like the rider and the vehicle. Okay, that's in a mitzvah. Now we're going to come to a third level of unity that we have with God. And it's when we learn Torah, like we're doing now, like the words of Torah, right, which is the power of speech, and also the meditation of it, which is the power of our thoughts. Right? There's really no action when it comes to Torah study. It's you got to understand it with your mind or your thoughts to think it, to understand it, and you've got to speak it. Right? Those are the two possibilities. Those are more deeper powers of the soul than action. Right? Action is the most external aspect of the soul's power, and the more simplest, shall we say, compared to speech, is a much more, because action, an animal can act also, right? An animal can plow the field. That's an action. Doesn't speak about it. Doesn't communicate. Definitely not like humans do. And it definitely doesn't think about, Tanya while it's plowing the field. A cow doesn't, an ox doesn't do that. So the power of action, animals also have. Okay, we do it in a mitzvah, but I'm just bringing out that it's a lesser power of the soul. Speech is a greater power, and thought is even more profound and intricate and power of our soul. So when we study Torah, right, then what's happening then? We have a perfect unity with God too. But it's much deeper than the rider and the vehicle. And it's even deeper unity than the soul's power of action, which is metaphorically like body and soul. Because even though body and soul are seamlessly one, and that's greater than rider and vehicle, which they're not one at all. Just that the rider is in control of the vehicle. So there's a certain unity there. But in the end, body and soul come from two different places. They seamlessly one together, but after a person passes away, of course, the body and soul are separated. So there's even a deeper unity than when it comes to study of Torah. And that is like the unity of the soul and the powers of the soul. Which the powers of the soul are, of course, the three parts of intellect, Chabad, Chachma and Bina V'das, and the seven emotions, right? So those are never separated from each other, even though there's a distinction between the core essence of the soul and the power of the soul. But the unity that comes to Torah study is a perfect unity that is nothing like it. And what we're doing right now. So let's understand that a little more. Now, when you do a mitzvah, so it's the inner will of God, right? And you're doing the inner will of God. Therefore, there's a union. But in a sense, you're just doing that which He wants, right? Which, of course, is phenomenal. But Torah is the divine will. It's not like God's will that we should do something, right? The halachic subject or the Tanya that we're learning, right, is identical. In other words, what I'm saying right now and what I'm thinking right now is in of itself identical with the divine will. It's identical with the divine will. So the fact that I think it, right, the fact that I think it, I'm thinking the divine will. And therefore, the unity is much more profound. And likewise, similarly, the letter combinations of the five books of Moses, the prophets, the holy writings, are also an expression of God's will and wisdom. They are absolutely one with God. So, in other words, what does it mean absolutely one? They're not as the metaphor we had for mitzvahs are like the organs of the king. Expression 248 organs of the king, 248 positive commandments are an expression of the divine will. So there's the will, and my will is now to move my arm. So right, that shows of a great unity and a oneness that there is in the soul's will and the limb itself. But the will and the limb are still two separate things, right? So in the person, at least, in God, his inner will is an expression in a limb, right, of God, figuratively speaking. God doesn't have physical limbs, but the figuratively speaking expresses then in the limb, expresses the will of God. But it's only expressing the will of God. It isn't the will of God. Actually, maybe that's not a right way to say that. In any case, when it comes to Torah study, it isn't merely the limb of God. The divine will is perfect unity with God himself. The divine will being and the divine wisdom being the Torah. So therefore, when I'm studying Torah, it's completely revealed in the divine soul and the inner garments of thought and speech. Because when you study Torah, it is the divine will and wisdom, it itself, that you are grasping, understanding, and thinking and talking about. Therefore, there's nothing that separates you with God. And it's even a deeper unity than the act of doing a mitzvah. And it's such a great unity that it is the source of life to even the spiritual worlds, which they don't have this capability of thinking and speaking the words of Torah. So they get their vitality through us. As it says, God's wisdom is the source of all creation. God's wisdom is the Torah. So we speak and think it. We bring vitality to the spiritual realm, let alone to this world itself, and let alone, of course, to us. So we're united in one with God. Now, everything that we just said is perfectly true, yet we don't experience it. Right now, I'm not experiencing my soul's perfect unity with God, metaphorically, like my soul with the 10 powers of the soul are perfectly united, a perfect union. That's what's happening right now. But this encompassing light is too powerful for me to experience. Hence, I don't see it. I don't experience it. I'm not feeling it. Anything that I do feel is incomparably less than what we just explained. Right? Doesn't mean we don't feel something, but it just means what we do feel and experience is incomparably less. So this is a very technical teachings that we learned today. But to sum up, the act of doing a mitzvah, the using our speech for a mitzvah of prayer, Torah study, or the study of Torah, different levels of unity and oneness with God through what we do, as we explained, right? The vehicle, body and soul and the powers of the soul, three different metaphors to bring out three different types of unity, oneness that we have with God. But all of it is fulfilling the inner will of God. The inner will of God is what he truly wants. And the inner will of God means that it is the source of all vitality, all life, all life. And therefore we bring life, not just to us, in a unity, not just to us, but in ourselves. We do it, as we just explained, in a unity with God, in a oneness with God, in 3 different dimensions. And through that, we bring vitality to the rest of the world. We don't feel that. We don't experience it. Well, the Alter Rebbe at least gives us now an understanding of it intellectually. Intellectually, to have an understanding of it, that should give us a real inspiration to learn more Tanya, to learn more Torah, and to do more mitzvahs. All right. Any questions? Any comments? Yes, and when we focus on the mitzvah, even if we're going through experiences in our lives that may not be so wonderful, maybe even painful, we focus on the mitzvah, what God needs from us, and we connect this way. Very powerful. We're able to rise above human pain. So Monica, so is the physical act using the limb less significant, so to speak, than the inner soul garment of thought and speech? Very good question. So we can't just connect to God through study of Torah, because then we'd only be using our inner garment of thought and speech. And actually, we will see when we get to chapters 35 and 36, 37, those 3 chapters, we will see the unique power of doing the act of the mitzvah, which is greater than the unity that we have with God through the study of Torah. It's greater. In what respect? Well, we'll have to wait and see to those chapters, right? But excellent, Monica. So in the unity with God, absolutely, it's greater through the study of Torah. But in fulfillment of what God needs from us, so then that's a different story. We'll then get into the physical actions of the mitzvahs that we do. But yeah, excellent question. All right, any other questions? Davida, if some doesn't do any mitzvahs or Torah study, are they bound up? So there isn't, the Talmud tells us that there's no Jew that is not full of mitzvahs, like a pomegranate is full of seeds. So we're all full of mitzvahs, everyone. Some more, some less, but everybody is. So we don't have to worry. You don't have to put, but Monica, just to identify that what the person is asking a question, it's easier if there's 2 question marks before. Whether red or just regular doesn't make a difference. But, red just more identifiable. But either one's good. Okay. Hold on, let's see. I don't see anything on Instagram. Luz, please share with us.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Shabbat shalom, everyone. Rabbi, I was going to tell you, when you said that we do not feel when we get the connection, like an electric vehicle that connects to the charger, we can never feel that intensity. But I believe that we do feel it in the effect that it has in our lives. Like these sessions are like a little charge for me. Um, when I listen to your voice, when I learn, when I study, when I read, my life moves more peacefully. I'm gonna have to say it nicer when I watch the news or when I end up with listening to a discussion or something that's not very nice, then I feel like a little drain of my energy. Does that make sense, Rabbi?
Absolutely. So what you're describing, Lewis, and thank you for describing that, is the human feelings that we have, right? Then when we study. So when I study, and I do this every day, day in, day out, it is a highlight. It is uplifting. It is, and there's no question. It makes you sense that you're on top of the mountain rather than you're at the bottom of the mountain climbing something that seems impossible. Life is, it's wonderful. But those are all the human feelings that we have, which are great, that we should, sense them and realize that how lucky we are, as you said, learning Torah and how it uplifts us, and then how we're drained when we hear the news, because, it's all about klipa, it's all about, all negativity and so on. So that's great, that's beautiful. But and that we can, and we hopefully do experience that when we learn, how uplifting it is, and how it gives us the power to rise above, the pettiness of life, and the smallness of the smallness that sometimes we can stoop to. So absolutely correct. What the Alter Rebbe explained over here is something much more profound and deeper, that we're not capable of experiencing because it's too great of a light. Because if we were experiencing it, we would become completely nullified. We wouldn't sense any sense of self, because what are we saying? We're coming back to the level of how we are one with God from His perspective. We're always that way. And now through the mitzvah, we are doing that and bringing that reality back to us. So to be completely, bound up in such a manner, is beyond our capability of experiencing. It is such a powerful light of God. But it doesn't take away from the truth of it. Just because I don't experience it doesn't mean it's not happening. It is happening. And what you described is beautiful, that we should all be able to, get to and appreciate. Thank you. That was very good, Liz. Excellent, excellent. All right, folks.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. All right, we're going to continue with Rambam right after this um, on Zoom and on Chabad ZK Facebook. A reminder, Sunday night that there's going to be TRC, and those who didn't get a chance yet to sign up. Something not to miss. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad Zurich and Kadesh in Montreal, Canada. It's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. Have an amazing, wonderful day and a wonderful good Shabbos.